Book 1, Part 2 of Xenofonte's Anábase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anábase by Xenofonte, translated by H. G. Dakins. Book 1, Part 2. Number 3. At Tarsus, Cyrus and his army halted for 20 days, the soldiers refusing to advance further, since the suspicion ripened in their minds that the expedition was in reality directed against the king, and, as they insisted, they had not engaged their services for that object. Clearchus set the example of trying to force his men to continue their march, but he had no sooner started at the head of his troops than they began to pelt him and his baggage train, and Clearchus had a narrow escape of being stoned to death there and then. Later on, when he perceived that force was useless, he summoned an assembly of his own men, and for a long time he stood and wept, while the men gazed in silent astonishment. At last he spoke as follows: "Fellow soldiers, do not marvel that I am sorely distressed on account of the present troubles. Cyrus has been no ordinary friend to me. When I was in banishment, he honored me in various ways, and made me also a present of 10,000 darics. These I accepted, but not to lay them upon for myself for private use, not to squander them in pleasure, but to expend them on yourselves. And, first of all, I went to war with the Thracians, and with you to aid, I wreaked vengeance on them in behalf of Hellas, driving them out of the Chersonese, when they wanted to deprive its Hellenic inhabitants of their lands. But as soon as Cyrus summoned me, I took you with me and set out, so that, if my benefactor had any need of me, I might requite him for the good treatment I myself had received at his hands. But, since you are not minded to continue the march with me, one of two things is left to me to do. Either I must renounce you for the sake of my friendship with Cyrus, or I must go with you at the cost of deceiving him. Whether I am about to do right or not I cannot say, but I choose yourselves, and whatever betide, I mean to share your fate. Never shall it be said of me by any one that, having led Greek troops against the barbarians, I betrayed the Hellenes and chose the friendship of the barbarian. No, since you do not choose to obey and follow me, I will follow after you. Whatever betide, I will share your fate. I look upon you as my country, my friends, my allies, and with you I think I shall be honored, wherever I be. Without you, I do not see how I can help a friend or hurt a foe. My decision is taken. Wherever you go, I go also." Such were his words, but the soldiers, not only his own but the rest also, when they heard what he said, and how he had scouted the idea of going up to the great king's palace, expressed their approval, and more than 2,000 men deserted Xenius and Passium, and took their arms and baggage train, and came and encamped with Clearchus. But Cyrus, in despair and vexation at this turn of affairs, sent for Clearchus. He refused to come, but, without the knowledge of his soldiers, sent a message to Cyrus, bidding him to keep a good heart, for that all would arrange itself in the right way, and bade him keep on sending for him, whilst he himself refused to go. After that he got together his own men, with those who had joined him, and of the rest any who chose to come, and spoke as follows: "Fellow soldiers, it is clear that the relations of Cyrus to us are identical with ours to him. We are no longer his soldiers, since we have ceased to follow him, and he on his side is no longer our paymaster. He, however, no doubt considers himself wronged by us, and though he goes on sending for me, I cannot bring myself to go to him, for two reasons: chiefly from a sense of shame, for I am forced to admit to myself that I have altogether deceived him, but partly too because I am afraid of him seizing me, and inflicting a penalty on the wrongs which he conceives that I have done him. In my opinion, then, this is no time for us to go to sleep and forget all about ourselves. Rather it is high time to deliberate on our next move. And as long as we do not remain here, we had better bethink us how we are to abide in security; or, if we are resolved to turn our backs at once, what will be the safest means of retreat; and, further, how we are to procure supplies, for without supplies there is no profit whatsoever in the general or the private soldier. The man with whom we have to deal is an excellent friend to his friends, but a very dangerous enemy to his foes; and he is backed up by a force of infantry and cavalry and ships, such as we all alike very well see and know, since we can hardly be said to have posted ourselves at any great distance from him. If then any one has a suggestion to make, now is the time to speak." With these words he ceased. Then various speakers stood up, some of their own motion to propound their views, others inspired by Clearchus to dilate on the hopeless difficulty of either staying or going back without the good will of Cyrus. One of these in particular, with a make-believe of anxiety to commence the homeward march without further pause, called upon them instantly to choose other generals if Clearchus were not himself prepared to lead them back. "Let them at once purchase supplies," the market being in the heart of the Asiatic camp. "Let them pack up their baggage. Let them," he added, "go to Cyrus, and ask for some ships in order to return by sea. If he refuses to give them ships, let them demand of him a guide to lead them back through a friendly district. And if he would not so much as give them a guide, they could but put themselves, without more ado, in marching order, and send on a detachment to occupy the pass, before Cyrus and the Cilicians, whose property," the speaker added, "we have so plentifully pillaged, can anticipate us." Such were the remarks of that speaker. He was followed by Clearchus, who merely said, "As to my acting personally as general at this season, pray do not propose it. I can see numerous obstacles to my doing so. Obedience in the fullest I can render to the man of your choice; that is another matter, and you shall see and know that I can play my part under command with the best of you." After Clearchus another spokesman stood up and proceeded to point out the simplicity of the speaker, who proposed to ask for vessels, just as if Cyrus were minded to renounce the expedition and sail back again. "And let me further point out," he said, "what a simple-minded notion it is to beg a guide of the very man whose designs we are marring. If we can trust any guide whom Cyrus may vouchsafe to us, why not order Cyrus at once to occupy the pass on our behoof? For my part, I should think twice before I set foot on any ship that he might give us, for fear lest he should sink them with his men of war. And I should equally hesitate to follow any guide of his. He might lead us into some place out of which we should find it impossible to escape. I should much prefer, if I am to return home against the will of Cyrus at all, to give him the slip, and so be gone. Which indeed is impossible, but these schemes are simply nonsensical. My proposal is that a deputation of fit persons, with Clearchus, should go to Cyrus. Let them go to Cyrus and ask him what use he proposes to make of us. And if the business is at all similar to that on which he once before employed a body of foreigners, let us by all means follow. Let us show that we are the equals of those who accompanied him on his march up formerly. But if the design should turn out to be of larger import than the former one, involving more toil and more danger, we should ask him either to give us good reasons for following his lead, or else consent to send us away into a friendly country. In this way, whether we follow him, we shall do so as friends, and with heart and soul, or whether we go back, we shall do so in security. The answer this shall be reported to us here, and when we have heard it, we will advise as to our best course." This resolution was carried, and they chose and sent a deputation with Clearchus, who put to Cyrus the questions which had been agreed upon by the army. Cyrus replied as follows: that he had received news that Abrocomus, an enemy of his, was posted on the Euphrates, 12 stages off. His object was to march against this aforesaid Abrocomus, and if he were still there, he wished to inflict punishment upon him. "Or, if he be fled," so the reply concluded, "we will there deliberate on the best course." The deputation received the answer, and reported it to the soldiers. The suspicion that he was leading them against the king was not dispelled, but it seemed best to follow him. They only demanded an increase of pay, and Cyrus promised them to give them half as much again as they had hitherto received, that is to say, a daric and a half a month to each man, instead of a daric. Was he really leading them to attack the king? Not even at this moment was anyone apprised of the fact, at any rate in an open and public manner. 4. From this point he marched 2 stages, 10 parasangs, to the river Sarus, which is 200 feet broad, and from the Sarus he marched a single stage, 5 parasangs, to Isi, the last city in Cilicia. It lies on the seaboard, a prosperous, large, and flourishing town. Here they halted 3 days, and here Cyrus was joined by his fleet. There were 35 ships from Peloponnesus, with the Lacedaemonian admiral Pythagoras on board. These had been piloted from Ephesus by Thamos the Egyptian, who himself had another fleet of 25 ships belonging to Cyrus. These had formed Thamos's blockading squadron at Miletus, when that city sided with Tissaphernes. He had also used them in other military services rendered to Cyrus in his operations against that satrap. There was a 3rd officer on board the fleet, the Lacedaemonian Chrysophus, who had been sent for by Cyrus, and had brought with him 700 hoplites, over whom he was to act as general in the service of Cyrus. The fleet lay at anchor opposite Cyrus's tent. Here too another reinforcement presented itself. It was a body of 400 hoplites, Hellenic mercenaries in the service of Abrocomus, who deserted him for Cyrus, and joined in the campaign against the king. From Isi he marched a single stage, 5 parasangs, to the gates of Cilicia in Syria. This was a double fortress. The inner and nearer one, which protects Cilicia, was held by Synesius and a garrison of Cilicians. The outer and further one protecting Syria was reported to be garrisoned by a body of the king's troops. Through the gap between the 2 fortresses flows a river named the Carsus, which is 100 feet broad, and the whole space between was scarcely more than 600 yards. To force a passage here would be impossible, so narrow was the pass itself, with the fortification walls stretching down to the sea, and precipitous rocks above, while both fortresses were furnished with gates. It was the existence of this pass which had induced Cyrus to send for the fleet, so as to enable him to lead a body of hoplites inside and outside the gates, and so to force a passage through the enemy, if he were guarding the Syrian gate, as he fully expected to find Abrocomus doing so with a large army. This, however, Abrocomus had not done, but as soon as he learnt that Cyrus was in Cilicia, he had turned round and made his exit from Phoenicia to join the king with an army amounting, as report said, to 300,000 men. From this point Cyrus pursued his march through Syria, a single stage, 5 parasangs, to Mirandus, a city inhabited by Phoenicians on the seacoast. This was a commercial port, and numerous merchant vessels were riding at anchor in the harbor. Here they halted 7 days, and here Xenius, the Arcadian general, and Pasion, the Megarian, got on board a trader, and having stowed away their most valuable effects, set sail for home. Most people explain the act as the outcome of a fit of jealousy, because Cyrus had allowed Clearchus to retain their men, who had deserted to him, in hopes of returning to Hellas, instead of marching against the king. When the 2 had so vanished, a rumor spread that Cyrus was after them with some ships of war, and some hoped the cowards might be caught. Others pitied them, if that should be their fate. But Cyrus summoned the generals and addressed them. "Xenius and Pasion," he said, have taken leave of us, but they need not flatter themselves that in doing so they have stolen into hiding. I know where they have gone, nor will they owe their escape to speed. I have men of war to capture their craft if I like, but heaven help me, if I mean to pursue them, never shall it be said of me that I turn people to account as long as they stay with me, but as soon as they are minded to be off, I seize and maltreat them, and strip them of their wealth. Not so. Let them go with the consciousness that our behaviour to them is better than theirs to us. And yet I have their children and wives safe under lock and key at Tralles. They shall not be deprived even of these. They shall receive them back in return for their former goodness to me. So he spoke, and the Hellenes, even those who had been out of heart at the thought of marching up the country, when they heard of the nobleness of Cyrus, were happier and more eager to follow him on his path. After this Cyrus marched onward 4 stages, 20 parasangs to the river Chalus. That river is 100 feet broad, and is stocked with tame fish, which the Syrians regard as gods, and will not suffer to be injured. So too the pigeons of the place. The villages in which they camp belong to Parysatis, as part of her girdle money. From this point he marched on 5 stages, 30 parasangs to the sources of the river Dardus, which is 100 feet broad. Here stood the palace of Belesys, the ruler of Syria, with its park, which was a very large and beautiful one, and full of the products of all the seasons in their course. But Cyrus cut down the park and burnt the palace. Thence he marched on 3 stages, 15 parasangs to the river Euphrates, which is nearly half a mile broad. A large and flourishing city, named Thapsacus, stands on its banks. Here they halted 5 days, and here Cyrus sent for the generals of the Hellenes, and told them that the advance was now to be made upon Babylon, against the great king. He bade them to communicate this information to the soldiers, and persuade them to follow. The generals called an assembly and announced the news to the soldiers. The latter were indignant and angry with the generals, accusing them of having kept secret what they had long known, and refused to go, unless a bribe of money were given them as had been given to their predecessors when they went up with Cyrus to the court of his father, not as now to fight a battle, but on a peaceful errand, the visit of a son to his father by invitation. The demand was reported to Cyrus by the generals, and he undertook to give each man 5 silver minae as soon as Babylon was reached, and their pay in full, until he had safely conveyed them back to Ionia again. In this manner the Hellenic force was persuaded, that is to say, the majority of them. Menon, indeed, before it was clear what the rest of the soldiers would do, whether in fact they would follow the Cyrus or not, collected his own troops apart, and made them the following speech. Men, he said, if you will listen to me, there is a method by which, without risk or toil, you may win the special favor of Cyrus beyond the rest of the soldiers. You ask what is it I should have you to do? I will tell you. Cyrus at this instant is begging the Hellenes to follow him to attack the king. I say then, cross the Euphrates at once, before it is clear what the answer the rest will make. If they vote in favor of following, you will get the credit of having set the example, and Cyrus will be grateful to you. He will look upon you as being the heartiest in his cause. He will repay, as of all the others he best knows how, while, if the rest vote against crossing, we shall go back again, but as the sole adherents, whose fidelity he can altogether trust. It is you whom Cyrus will turn to account, as commandants of garrisons or captains of companies. You need only ask him for whatever you want, and you will get it from him, as being the friends of Cyrus. The men heard and obeyed, and before the rest had given their answer, they were already across. But when Cyrus perceived that Menon's troops had crossed he was well pleased, and he sent Glus in the division in question with this message: Soldiers, accept my thanks at present. Eventually you shall thank me. I will see to that, or my name is not Cyrus. The soldiers therefore could not but pray heartily for his success, so high their hopes ran. But to Menon, it was said, he sent gifts with lordly liberality. This done, Cyrus proceeded to cross, and in his wake followed the rest of the armament to a man. As they forded, never a man was wetted above the chest, nor even until this moment, said the men of Thapsacus, had the river been so crossed on foot. Boats had always been required, but these at the present time Abrocomus, in his desire to hinder Cyrus from crossing, had been at pains to burn. Thus the passage was looked upon as a thing miraculous. The river had manifestly retired before the face of Cyrus, like a courtier bowing to his future king. From this place he continued his march through Syria, 9 stages, 50 parasangs, and they reached the river Araxes. Here were several villages full of corn and wine, in which they halted 3 days and provisioned the army. End of Book 1, Part 2.
Book 1, Part 1 of Xenofonte's Anábase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. Anábase by Xenophon, translated by H.G. Dakins, Book 1, Part 1. Darius and Parysatis had 2 sons. The elder was named Artaxerxes, and the younger Cyrus. Now, as Darius lay sick, and felt that the end of life drew near, he wished both his sons to be with him. The elder, as it chanced, was already there, but Cyrus he must needs send for from the province over which he had made him satrap, having appointed him general, moreover, of all the forces that muster in the plain of the Castolus. Thus Cyrus went up, taking with him Tissaphernes as his friend, and accompanied also by a body of Hellenes, 300 heavy-armed men, under the command of Xenias the Parrhasian. Now when Darius was dead, and Artaxerxes was established in the kingdom, Tissaphernes brought slanderous accusations against Cyrus before his brother the king, of harbouring designs against him. And Artaxerxes, listening to the words of Tissaphernes, laid hands upon Cyrus, desiring to put him to death. But his mother made intercession for him, and sent him back again in safety to his province. He then, having so escaped through peril and dishonour, fell to considering not only how he might avoid ever again being in his brother's power, but how, if possible, he might become king in his stead. Parysatis, his mother, was his first resource, for she had more love for Cyrus than for Artaxerxes upon his throne. Moreover, Cyrus's behaviour towards all who came to him from the king's court was such that, when he sent them away again, they were better friends to himself than to the king his brother. Nor did he neglect the barbarians in his own service, but trained them at once to be capable as warriors and devoted adherents of himself. Lastly, he began collecting his Hellenic armament, but with the utmost secrecy, so that he might take the king as far as might be at unawares. The manner in which he contrived the levying of the troops was as follows. First, he sent orders to the commandants of garrisons in the cities so held by him, bidding them to get together as large a body of picked Peloponnesian troops as they severally were able, on the plea that Tissaphernes was plotting against their cities. And truly these cities of Ionia had originally belonged to Tissaphernes, being given to him by the king. But at this time, with the exception of Miletus, they had all revolted to Cyrus. In Miletus, Tissaphernes, having become aware of similar designs, had forestalled the conspirators by putting some to death and banishing the remainder. Cyrus, on his side, welcomed these fugitives, and having collected an army, laid siege to Miletus by sea and land, endeavouring to reinstate the exiles. And this gave him another pretext for collecting an armament. At the same time he sent to the king, and claimed, as being the king's brother, that these cities should be given to himself, rather than that Tissaphernes should continue to govern them. And in furtherance of this end, the queen, his mother, cooperated with him, so that the king not only failed to see the design against himself, but concluded that Cyrus was spending his money on armaments in order to make war on Tissaphernes. Nor did it pain him greatly to see the two at war together, and the less so because Cyrus was careful to remit the tribute due to the king from the cities which belonged to Tissaphernes. A third army was being collected for him in the Chersonese, over against Abydos, the origin of which was as follows. There was a Lacedaemonian exile named Clearchus, with whom Cyrus had become associated. Cyrus admired the man, and made him a present of 10,000 darics. Clearchus took the gold, and with the money raised an army, and using the Chersonese as his base of operations, set to work to fight the Thracians north of the Hellespont in the interests of the Hellenes, and with such happy result that the Hellespontine cities of their own accord were eager to contribute funds for the support of his troops. In this way, again, an armament was being secretly maintained for Cyrus. Then there was the Thessalian Aristippus, Cyrus's friend, who, under pressure of the rival political party at home, had come to Cyrus and asked him for pay for 2,000 mercenaries to be continued for 3 months, which would enable him, he said, to gain the upper hand of his antagonists. Cyrus replied by presenting him with 6 months' pay for 4,000 mercenaries, only stipulating that Aristippus should not come to terms with his antagonists without final consultation with himself. In this way he secured to himself the secret maintenance of a 4th armament. Further, he bade Proxenus, a Boeotian, who was another friend, get together as many men as possible, and join him in an expedition which he meditated against the Pisidians, who were causing annoyance to his territory. Similarly, 2 other friends, Sophonetus the Stymphalian and Socrates the Achaean, had orders to get together as many men as possible and come to him, since he was on the point of opening a campaign, along with Milesian exiles, against Tissaphernes. These orders were duly carried out by the officers in question. But when the right moment seemed to him to have come, at which he should begin his march into the interior, the pretext which he put forward was his desire to expel the Pisidians utterly out of the country, and he began collecting both his Asiatic and his Hellenic armaments, avowedly against that people. From Sardis in each direction his orders sped. To Clearchus, to join him there with the whole of his army; to Aristippus, to come to terms with those at home, and to dispatch to him the troops in his employ; to Xenias the Arcadian, who was acting as general-in-chief of the foreign troops in the cities, to present himself with all the men available, excepting only those who were actually needed to garrison the citadels. He next summoned the troops at present engaged in the siege of Miletus, and called upon the exiles to follow him on his intended expedition, promising them that if he were successful in his object, he would not pause until he had reinstated them in their native city. To this invitation they hearkened gladly. They believed in him, and with their arms they presented themselves at Sardis. So, too, Xenias arrived at Sardis with the contingent from the cities, 4,000 hoplites. Proxenus also with 1500 hoplites and 500 light-armed troops, Sophinetus the Stymphalian with 1000 hoplites, Socrates the Achaean with 500 hoplites, while the Megarian Passion came with 300 hoplites and 300 peltasts. This latter officer, as well as Socrates, belonged to the force engaged against Miletus. These all joined him at Sardis. But Tissaphernes did not fail to note these proceedings. An equipment so large pointed to something more than an invasion of Pisidia, so he argued, and with what speed he might he set off to the king, attended by about 500 horse. The king, on his side, had no sooner heard from Tissaphernes of Cyrus's great armament than he began to make counter-preparations. Thus Cyrus, with the troops which I have named, set out from Sardis and marched on and on through Lydia 3 stages, making 22 parasangs, to the river Meander. That river is 200 feet broad, and was spanned by a bridge consisting of 7 boats. Crossing it, he marched through Phrygia a single stage of 8 parasangs, to Colossae, an inhabited city, prosperous and large. Here he remained 7 days, and was joined by Menon the Thessalian, who arrived with 1000 hoplites and 500 peltasts, Dolopes, Aenianes, and Olynthians. From this place he marched 3 stages, 20 parasangs in all, to Selene, a populous city of Phrygia, large and prosperous. Here Cyrus owned a palace and a large park full of wild beasts, which he used to hunt on horseback whenever he wished to give himself or his horses exercise. Through the midst of the park flows the river Meander, the sources of which are within the palace buildings, and it flows through the city of Selene. The great king also has a palace in Selene, a strong place on the sources of another river, the Marsyas, at the foot of the Acropolis. This river also flows through the city, discharging itself into the Meander, and is 25 feet broad. Here is the place where Apollo is said to have flayed Marsyas when he had conquered him in the contest of skill. He hung up the skin of the conquered man in the cavern where the spring wells forth, and hence the name of the river Marsyas. It was on this site that Xerxes, as tradition tells, built this very palace, as well as the citadel of Selene itself, on his retreat from Hellas, after he had lost the famous battle. Here Cyrus remained for 30 days, during which Clearchus the Lacedaemonian arrived with 1000 hoplites and 800 Thracian peltasts and 200 Cretan archers. At the same time also came Sosis the Syracusan with 3000 hoplites, and Sophinetus the Arcadian with 1000 hoplites. And here Cyrus held a review, and numbered his Hellenes in the park, and found that they amounted in all to 11,000 hoplites and about 2000 peltasts. From this place he continued his march 2 stages, 10 parasangs, to the populous city of Pelte, where he remained 3 days, while Xenias the Arcadian celebrated the Lycia with sacrifice and instituted games. The prizes were headbands of gold, and Cyrus himself was a spectator of the contest. From this place the march was continued 2 stages, 12 parasangs, to Ceremone Agora, a populous city, the last on the confines of Mysia. Thence a march of 3 stages, 30 parasangs, brought him to Caestrupedion, a populous city. Here Cyrus halted 5 days, and the soldiers, whose pay was now more than 3 months in arrear, came several times to the palace gates demanding their dues, while Cyrus put them off with fine words and expectations, but could not conceal his vexation, for it was not his fashion to stint payment when he had the means. At this point Epyaxa, the wife of Cyanesis, the king of the Cilicians, arrived on a visit to Cyrus, and it was said that Cyrus received a large gift of money from the queen. At this date, at any rate, Cyrus gave the army 4 months' pay. The queen was accompanied by a bodyguard of Cilicians and Aspendians, and, if report speaks truly, Cyrus had intimate relations with the queen. From this place he marched 2 stages, 10 parasangs, to Thymbrium, a populous city. Here, by the side of the road, is the spring of Midas, the king of Phrygia, as it is called, where Midas, as the story goes, caught the satyr by drugging the spring with wine. From this place he marched 2 stages, 10 parasangs, to Tyrium, a populous city. Here he halted 3 days, and the Cilician queen, according to the popular account, begged Cyrus to exhibit his armament for her amusement. The latter, being only too glad to make such an exhibition, held a review of the Hellenes and barbarians in the plain. He ordered the Hellenes to draw up their lines and post themselves in their customary battle order, each general marshalling his own battalion. Accordingly they drew up 4 deep. The right was held by Menon and those with him, the left by Clearchus and his men, the centre by the remaining generals with theirs. Cyrus first inspected the barbarians, who marched past in troops of horses and companies of infantry. He then inspected the Hellenes, driving past them in his chariot, with the queen in her carriage. And they all had brass helmets and purple tunics and greaves, and their shields uncovered. After he had driven past the whole body, he drew up his chariot in front of the centre of the battle line, and sent his interpreter Pygries to the generals of the Hellenes, with orders to present arms and to advance along the whole line. This order was repeated by the generals to their men, and at the sound of the bugle, with shields forward and spears in rest, they advanced to meet the enemy. The pace quickened, and with a shout the soldiers spontaneously fell into a run, making in the direction of the camp. Great was the panic of the barbarians. The Cilician queen in her carriage turned and fled. The sutlers in the marketing place left their wares and took to their heels, and the Hellenes meanwhile came into camp with a roar of laughter. What astounded the queen was the brilliancy and order of the armament, but Cyrus was pleased to see the terror inspired by the Hellenes in the hearts of the Asiatics. From this place he marched on 3 stages, 20 parasangs, to Iconium, the last city of Phrygia, where he remained 3 days. Thence he marched through Lycaonia 5 stages, 30 parasangs. This was hostile country, and he gave it over to the Hellenes to pillage. At this point Cyrus sent back the Cilician queen to her own country by the quickest route, and to escort her he sent the soldiers of Menon and Menon himself. With the rest of the troops he continued his march through Cappadocia 4 stages, 25 parasangs, to Dana, a populous city, large and flourishing. Here they halted 3 days, within which interval Cyrus put to death on a charge of conspiracy a Persian nobleman named Megaphernes, a wearer of the royal purple, and along with him another high dignitary among his subordinate commanders. From this place they endeavoured to force a passage into Cilicia. Now the entrance was by an exceedingly steep cart road, impracticable for an army in face of a resisting force, and report said that Cynesis was on the summit of the pass guarding the approach. Accordingly they halted a day in the plain, but next day came a messenger informing them that Cynesis had left the pass, doubtless after perceiving that Menon's army was already in Cilicia on his own side of the mountains, and he had further been informed that ships of war belonging to the Lacedaemonians and to Cyrus himself, with Tamos on board as admiral, were sailing round from Ionia to Cilicia. Whatever the reason might be, Cyrus made his way up into the hills without let or hindrance, and came in sight of the tents where the Cilicians were on guard. From that point he descended gradually into a large and beautiful plain country, well watered, and thickly covered with trees of all sorts and vines. This plain produces sesame plentifully, as also panic and millet and barley and wheat, and it is shut in on all sides by a steep and lofty wall of mountains from sea to sea. Descending through this plain country, he advanced 4 stages, 25 parasangs, to Tarsus, a large and prosperous city of Cilicia. Here stood the palace of Cynesis, the king of the country, and through the middle of the city flows a river called the Cydnus, 200 feet broad. They found that the city had been deserted by its inhabitants, who had betaken themselves with Cynesis to a strong place on the hills. All had gone except the tavern keepers. The seaboard inhabitants of Solae and Issae also remained. Now Epyaxa, Cyanesis's queen, had reached Tarsus 5 days in advance of Cyrus. During their passage over the mountains into the plain, 2 companies of Menon's army were lost. Some said they had been cut down by the Cilicians while engaged on some pillaging affair. Another account was that they had been left behind, and being unable to overtake the main body or discover the route, had gone astray and perished. However it was, they numbered 100 hoplites, and when the rest arrived, being in a fury at the destruction of their fellow soldiers, they vented their spleen by pillaging the city of Tarsus, and the palace to boot. Now when Cyrus had marched into the city, he sent for Cynesis to come to him. But the latter replied that he had never yet put himself into the hands of any one who was his superior, nor was he willing to accede to the proposal of Cyrus now, until in the end his wife persuaded him, and he accepted pledges of good faith. After this they met, and Cynesis gave Cyrus large sums in aid of his army, while Cyrus presented him with the customary royal gifts, to wit, a horse with a gold bit, a necklace of gold, a gold bracelet, and a gold scimitar, a Persian dress, and, lastly, the exemption of his territory from further pillage, with the privilege of taking back the slaves that had been seized, wherever they might chance to come upon them. End of Book 1, Part 1. Recording by Graham Redman.
Book 1, Part 3 of Xenofonte's Anábase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anábase by Xenofonte, translated by H. G. Dakins. Book 1, Part 3. Number 5. Thence he marched on through Arabia, keeping the Euphrates on the right, 5 desert stages, 35 parasangs. In this region the ground was one long, level plain, stretching far and wide like the sea, full of absinthe, whilst all the other vegetation, whether wood or reed was sweet-scented like spice or sweet herb. There were no trees, but there was wild game of all kinds, wild asses in greatest abundance, with plenty of ostriches. Besides these there were bustards and antelopes. These creatures were occasionally chased by the cavalry. The asses, when pursued, would run forward a space and then stand still, their pace being much swifter than that of horses, and as soon as the horses came close, they went through the same performance. The only way to catch them was for the riders to post themselves at intervals, and to hunt them in relays, as it were. The flesh of those they captured was not unlike venison, only more tender. No one was lucky enough to capture an ostrich. Some of the troopers did give chase, but it soon had to be abandoned, for the bird, in its effort to escape, speedily put a long interval between itself and its pursuers, plying its legs at full speed, and using its wings the while like a sail. The bustards were not so hard to catch when started suddenly, for they only take short flights like partridges, and are soon tired. Their flesh is delicious. As the army wended its way through this region, they reached the river Moscus, which is 100 feet in breadth. Here stood a big, deserted city, called Corsote, almost literally environed by the stream which flows round it in a circle. Here they halted 3 days and provisioned themselves. Thence they continued their march 13 desert stages, 90 parasangs, with the Euphrates still on their right, until they reached the gates. On these marches several of the baggage animals perished of hunger, for there was neither grass nor green herb or tree of any sort, but the country throughout was barren. The inhabitants make their living up quarrying millstones on the river banks, which they work up and take to Babylon and sell, purchasing corn in exchange for their goods. Corn failed the army, and was not to be got for money, except in the Lydian market open in Cyrus's Asiatic army, where a capith of wheat or barley cost 4 shekels, the shekel being equal to 7½ Attic obols, whilst the capith is the equivalent of 2 Attic cheonekes, dry measure, so that the troops subsisted on meat alone for the whole period. Some of the stages were long, whenever they had to push on to find water or fodder, and once they found themselves involved in a narrow way, where the deep clay presented an obstacle to the progress of the wagons. Cyrus with the nobles about him halted to superintend the operation, and ordered Glus and Pigres to take a body of barbarians and to help in extricating the wagons. As they seemed to be slow about the business, they turned round angrily to the Persian nobles and bade them lend a hand to force the wagons out. Then, if ever, what goes on to constitute one branch of good discipline was to be witnessed. Each of those addressed, just when he chanced to be standing, threw off his purple cloak and flung himself into the work with as much eagerness as if it had been a charge for victory. Down a steep hill they flew, with their costly tunics and embroidered trousers, some with the circlets round their necks and bracelets on their arms. In an instant they had sprung into the miry clay, and in less time than one could have conceived, they had landed the wagons safe on terra firma. Although it was plain that Cyrus was bent on pressing on the march, and averse to stoppages, except when he halted for the sake of provisioning or some other necessary object, being convinced that the more rapidly he advanced, the less prepared for battle would he find the king, while the slower his progress, the larger would be the hostile army which he would find collected. Indeed, the attentive observer could see, at a glance, that if the king's empire was strong in its extent of territory and the number of inhabitants, that strength is compensated by an inherent weakness, dependent upon the length of roads and the inevitable dispersion of defensive forces, where an invader insists upon pressing home the war by forced marches. On the opposite side of the Euphrates, to the point reached on one of these desert stages, was a large and flourishing city named Charmande. From this town the soldiers made purchases of provisions, crossing the river on rafts in the following fashion. They took the skins which they used as tent coverings and filled them with light grass. They then compressed and stitched them tightly by the ends, so that the water might not touch the hay. On these they crossed and got provisions, wine made from the date nut, and millet or pannic corn, the common staple of the country. Some dispute or other here occurred between the soldiers of Menon and Clearchus, in which Clearchus sentenced one of Menon's men as the delinquent, and had him flogged. The man went back to his own division and told them. Hearing what had been done to their comrade, his fellows fretted and fumed, and were highly incensed against Clearchus. The same day Clearchus visited the passage of the river, and after inspecting the market there, was returning with a few followers on horseback to his tent, and had to pass through Menon's quarters. Cyrus had not yet come up, but was riding up in the same direction. One of Menon's men, who was splitting wood, caught sight of Clearchus as he rode past, and aimed a blow at him with his axe. The aim took no effect, when another hurled a stone at him, and a third, and then several, with shouts and hisses. Clearchus made a rapid retreat to his own troops, and at once ordered them to get under arms. He bade his hoplites remain in position with their shields rested against their knees, while he, at the head of his Thracians and horsemen, of which he had more than 40 in his army, Thracians for the most part, advanced against Menon's soldiers, so that the latter, with Menon himself, were panic-stricken, and ran to seize their arms. Some even stood riveted to the spot in perplexity at the occurrence. Just then Prozinus came up from behind, as chance would have it, with his division of hoplites, and without a moment's hesitation marched into the open space between the rival parties, and grounded arms. Then he fell to begging Clearchus to desist. The latter was not too well pleased to hear his trouble mildly spoken of, when he had barely escaped being stoned to death, and he bade Prozinus retire and leave the intervening space open. At this juncture Cyrus arrived, and inquiring what happening, there was no time for hesitation. With his javelins firmly grasped in his hands he galloped up, escorted by some of his faithful bodyguard, who were present, and soon in the midst, exclaiming, "Clearchus, Prozinus, and you other Hellenes yonder, you know not what you do. As surely as you come to blows with one another, our fate is sealed. This very day I shall be cut to pieces, and so will you. Your turn will follow close on mine. Let our fortunes once take an evil turn, and these barbarians whom you see around will be worse foes to us than those who are present serving the king." At these words Clearchus came to his senses. Both parties paused from battle, and retired to their quarters. Order reigned. 6. As they advanced from this point, opposite Carmande, they looked upon the hoof prints and dung of horses at frequent intervals. It looked like the trail of some 2,000 horses. Keeping ahead of the army, these fellows burnt up the grass and everything else that was good for use. Now there was a Persian named Orontus. He was closely related to the king by birth, and in matters pertaining to war reckoned among the best of Persian warriors. Having formerly been at war with Cyrus, and afterwards reconciled to him, he now made a conspiracy to destroy him. He made a proposal to Cyrus. If Cyrus would furnish him with 1,000 horsemen, he would deal with these troopers who were burning down everything in front of them. He would lay an ambuscade and cut them down, or he would capture a host of them alive. In any case, he would put a stop to their aggressiveness and burnings. He would see to it that they had never got the chance of setting eyes on Cyrus's army and reporting its advent to the king. The proposal seemed plausible to Cyrus, who accordingly authorized Orontus to take a detachment from each of the generals and be gone. He, thinking that he had got his horsemen ready to his hand, wrote a letter to the king, announcing that he would ere long join him with as many troopers as he could bring. He bade him at the same time instruct the royal cavalry to welcome him as a friend. The letter further contained certain reminders of his former friendship and fidelity. This dispatch he delivered into the hands of one who was a trusty messenger, as he thought, but the bearer took it and gave it to Cyrus. Cyrus read it. Orontus was arrested. Then Cyrus summoned to his tent 7 of the noblest Persians among his personal attendants, and sent orders to the Hellenic generals to bring up a body of hoplites. These troops were to take a position round his tent. This the generals did, bringing up about 3,000 hoplites. Clearchus was also invited inside to assist at the court-martial, a compliment due to the position he held among the other generals, in the opinion not only of Cyrus, but also of the rest of the court. When he came out, he reported the circumstances of the trial, as to which indeed there was no mystery, to his friends. He said that Cyrus opened the inquiry with these words: I have invited you hither, my friends, that I may take advice with you, and carry out whatever, in the sight of God and man, it is right for me to do, as concerning the man before you, Orontes. The prisoner was, in the first instance, given to me by my father, to be my faithful subject. In the next place, acting, to use his words, under the orders of my brother, and having hold of the Acropolis of Sardis, he went to war with me. I met war with war, and forced him to think it more prudent to desist from war with me. Whereupon we shook hands, exchanging solemn pledges. After that, and at this point Cyrus turned to Orontes and addressed him personally, after that, did I do you any wrong? Answer: never. Again another question. Then later on, having received, as you admit, no injury from me, did you revolt to the Mysians and injure my territory, as far as in you lay? I did, was the reply. Then, once more having discovered the limits of your power, did you flee to the altar of Artemis, crying out that you repented? Did you thus work upon my feelings, that we a second time shook hands and made interchange of solemn pledges? Are these things so? Orontes again assented. Then what injury have you received from me, Cyrus asked, now that for the third time you have been detected in a treasonous plot against me? I must needs do so, he answered. Then Cyrus put one more question. But the day may come, may it not, when you will once again be hostile to my brother, and a faithful friend to myself? The other answered, even if I were, you would never be brought to believe it, Cyrus. At this point Cyrus turned to those who were present and said, such has been the conduct of the prisoner in the past, such is his language now. I now call upon you, and you first, Clearchus, to declare your opinion. What think you? And Clearchus answered, my advice to you is to put this man out of the way as soon as may be, so that we may be saved the necessity of watching him, and have more leisure, as far as he is concerned, to requite the services of those whose friendship is sincere. To this opinion, he told us, the rest of the court adhered. After that, at the bidding of Cyrus, each of those present, in turn, including the kinsman of Orontes, took him by the girdle, which is as much to say, let him die the death. And then those appointed let him out, and they who in old days were wont to do obeisance to him could not refrain even at that moment from bowing down before him, albeit they knew he was being led to death. After they had conducted him to the tent of Artapates, the trustiest of Cyrus's wand-bearers, none set eyes upon him ever again, alive or dead. No one of his own knowledge could declare the manner of his death, though some conjectured one thing and some another. No tomb to mark his resting place, either then or since, was ever seen. 7. From this place Cyrus marched through Babylonia, 3 stages, 12 parasangs. Now, on the third night, about midnight, Cyrus held a review of the Hellenes and Asiatics on the plain, expecting that the king would arrive the following day with his army to offer battle. He gave orders to Clearchus to take command of the right wing, and to Menon the Thessalian of the left, while he himself undertook to the disposition of his own forces in person. After the review, with the first approach of day, deserters from the great king arrived, bringing Cyrus information about the royal army. Then Cyrus summoned the generals and captains of the Hellenes, and held a council of war to arrange the plan of battle. He took this opportunity also to address the following words of compliment and encouragement to the meeting. Men of Hellas, he said, it is certainly not from dearth of barbarians to fight my battles that I put myself at your head as my allies, but because I hold you to be better and stronger than many barbarians. This is why I took you. See then that you prove yourselves to be men worthy of the liberty which you possess, and which I envy you. Liberty, it is a thing which, be well assured, I would choose in preference to all my other possessions multiplied many times. But I would like you to know into what sort of struggle you are going. Learn its nature from one who knows. Their numbers are great, and they come on with much noise. But if you can hold out against these 2 things, I confess I am ashamed to think what a sorry set of folk you will find the inhabitants of this land to be. But you are men, and brave you must be, being men. It is agreed, then, if you wish to return home, any of you, I undertake to send you back, in such sort that your friends at home shall envy you. But I flatter myself I shall persuade many of you to accept what I will offer you here, in lieu of what you left at home." Here Gauletes, a Samian exile and a trusty friend of Cyrus, being present, exclaimed, "Aye, Cyrus, but some say you can afford to make large promises now, because you are in the crisis of impending danger. But let matters go well with you, will you recollect? They shake their heads. Indeed, some add that, even if you did recollect, and were ever so willing, you would not be able to make good all your promises and repay." When Cyrus heard that, he answered, "You forget, sirs, my father's empire stretches southwards to a region where men cannot dwell by reason of the heat, and northwards to a region uninhabitable through cold. But all the intervening space is mapped out in satrapies belonging to my brother's friends, so that if victory be ours, it will be ours also to put our friends in possession in their room. On the whole, my fear is, not that I might not have enough to give to each of my friends, but lest I may not have friends enough on whom to bestow what I have to give, and to each of you Hellenes I will give you a crown of gold." So they, when they heard these words, were once more elated than ever themselves, and spread the good news among the rest outside. And there came into his presence both the generals and some of the other Hellenes also, claiming to know what they should have in the event of victory. And Cyrus satisfied the expectations of each and all, and so dismissed them. Now the advice and admonition of all who came into conversation with him was, not to enter the battle himself, but to post himself in rear of themselves. And at this season Clearchus put a question to him: "But do you think that your brother will give battle to you, Cyrus?" And Cyrus answered, "Not without a battle, be assured, shall the prize be won, if he be the son of Darius and Parysatis, a brother of mine." In the final arming for battle at this juncture the numbers were as follows: of Hellenes there were 10,400 heavy infantry with 2,500 targeteers, while the barbarians with Cyrus reached a total of 100,000. He had too about 20 Scythe chariots. The enemy's forces were reported to number 1,200,000, with 200 Scythe chariots. Besides, he had 6,000 cavalry under Artaxerxes. These formed the immediate vanguard of the king himself. The royal army was marshaled by 4 generals or field marshals, each in command of 300,000 men. Their names were Abrocomus, Tissaphernes, Gobryas, and Arbaces. But of this total, not more than 900,000 were engaged in the battle, with 150 Scythe chariots, since Abrocomus, in his march from Phoenicia, arrived 5 days late for the battle. Such was the information brought to Cyrus by deserters who came in from the king's army before the battle, and it was corroborated after the battle by those of the enemies who were taken prisoners. From this place Cyrus advanced one stage, 3 parasangs, with the whole body of his troops, Hellenic and barbarian alike, in order of battle. He expected the king to give battle the same day, for in the middle of this day's march a deep sunk trench was reached, 30 feet broad and 18 feet deep. The trench was carried inland through the plain, 12 parasangs distant to the wall of Medea. Here are canals flowing from the river Tigris. There are 4 in number, each about 100 feet broad and very deep. With corn ships plying upon them, they empty themselves into the Euphrates, and are at intervals of 1 parasang apart, and are spanned by bridges. Between the Euphrates and the trench was a narrow passage, 20 feet only in breadth. The trench itself had been constructed by the great king upon hearing of Cyrus's approach, to serve as a line of defense. Through this narrow passage then Cyrus and his army passed, and found themselves safe inside the trench. So there was no battle to be fought with the king that day, but there were numerous unmistakable traces of horse and infantry in retreat. Here Cyrus summoned Silanus, his Ambraciot soothsayer, and presented him with 3,000 darics, because 11 days back, when sacrificing, he had told him that the king would not fight within 10 days. And Cyrus had answered, "Well then, If he does not fight within that time, he will not fight at all. And if your prophecy comes true, I promise you 10 talents. So now that the 10 days were past, he presented him with the above sum. But as the king had failed to hinder the passage of Cyrus's army at the trench, Cyrus himself and the rest concluded that he must have abandoned the idea of offering battle, so that the next day Cyrus advanced with less than his former caution. On the 3rd day he was conducting the march, seated in his carriage, with only a small body of troops drawn up in front of him. The mass of the army was moving on in no kind of order, the soldiers having consigned their heavy arms to be carried in the wagons or on the backs of beasts. End of Book 1, Part 3. Chapter 1, Part 4 of Xenofonte's Anábase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anábase by Xenofonte. Translated by H.G. Dakins. Book 1, Part 4. Number 8. It was already about full market time, and the halting place at which the army was to take up quarters was nearly reached, when Patigæus, a Persian, a trusty member of Cyrus's personal staff, came galloping up at full speed on his horse, which was bathed in sweat, and to everyone he met he shouted in Greek and Persian, as fast as he could ejaculate the words, "The king is advancing with a large army ready for battle." Then ensued a scene of wild confusion. The Hellenes and all alike were expecting to be attacked on the instant, and before they could form their lines, Cyrus sprang from his carriage and donned his corslet. And then, leaping on his charger's back, with the javelins firmly clutched, he passed the order to the rest to arm themselves and fall into their several ranks. The orders were carried out with alacrity. The ranks shaped themselves. Clearchus held the right wing, resting on the Euphrates. Proxenus was next, and after him the rest, while Menon with his troops held the Hellenic left. Of the Asiatics, a body of Paphlagonian cavalry, 1,000 strong, were posted beside Clearchus on the right, and with them stood the Hellenic peltasts. On the left was Ariaeus, Cyrus's second in command, and the rest of the barbarian host. Cyrus with his bodyguard of cavalry, about 600 strong, all armed with corslets like Cyrus, and cuirasses and helmets. But not so Cyrus. He went into battle with head unhelmeted. So too all the horses with Cyrus wore forehead pieces and breastplates, and the troopers carried short Hellenic swords. It was now midday, and the enemy was not yet in sight, but with the approach of afternoon was seen dust like a white cloud, and after a considerable interval a black pall, as it were, spread far and high above the plain. As they came nearer, very soon was seen here and there a glint of bronze and spear points, and the ranks could plainly be distinguished. On the left were troopers wearing white cuirasses. "That is Tissaphernes in command," they said, and next to these a body of men bearing wicker shields, and next again heavy armed infantry with long wooden shields reaching to the feet. These were the Egyptians, they said, and then other cavalry, other bowmen. All were in national divisions, each nation marching in densely crowded squares. All along their front was a line of chariots at considerable intervals from one another, the famous scythe chariots, as they were named, having their scythes fitted to the axle-trees and stretching out slantwise, while others protruded under the chariot seats, facing the ground, so as to cut through all they encountered. The design was to let them dash full speed into the ranks of the Hellenes and cut them through. Curiously enough, the anticipation of Cyrus, when at the council of war he admonished the Hellenes not to mind the shouting of the Asiatics, was not justified. Instead of shouting, they came on in deep silence, softly and slowly, with even tread. At this instant, Cyrus, riding past in person, accompanied by Pigris, his interpreter, and 3 or 4 others, called aloud to Clearchus to advance against the enemy's center, for there the king was to be found. "And if we strike home at this point," he added, "our work is finished." Clearchus, though he could see the compact body at the center, and had been told by Cyrus that the king lay outside the Hellenic left, for owing to numerical superiority the king, while holding his own center, could well overlap Cyrus's extreme left, still hesitated to draw off his right wing from the river for fear of being turned on both flanks, and he simply replied, assuring Cyrus that he would take care all went well. At this time the barbarian army was evenly advancing, and the Hellenic division was still riveted at the spot, completing its formation as the various contingents came up. Cyrus, riding past at some distance from the lines, glancing his eye first in one direction and then in the other, so as to take a complete survey of friends and foes, when Xenophon the Athenian, seeing him, rode up from the Hellenic quarter to meet him, asking him whether he had any orders to give. Cyrus, pulling up his horse, begged him to make the announcement generally known that the omens from the victims, internal and external alike, were good. While he was speaking, he heard a confused murmur through the ranks and asked what it meant. The other replied that it was the watchword being passed down for the second time. Cyrus wondered who had given the order, and asked what the watchword was. On being told it was "Zeus, our Saviour, and victory," he replied, "I accept it, so let it be," and with this remark rode away to his own position. And now the two battle lines were no more than 3 or 4 furlongs apart, when the Hellenes began chanting the paean, and at the same time advanced towards the enemy. But with the forward movement a certain portion of the line curved onwards in advance, with wave-like sinuosity, and the portion left behind quickened to a run, and simultaneously a thrilling cry burst from all lips, like that in honor of the war god, "Eleo! Eleo!" And then the running became general. Some say they clashed their shields and spears, thereby causing terror to the horses, and before they had got within arrow shot the barbarians swerved and took to flight. And now the Hellenes gave chase with might and main, checked only by shouts to one another not to race, but to keep their ranks. The enemy's chariots, reft of their charioteers, swept onwards, some through the enemy themselves, others past the Hellenes. They, as they saw them coming, opened a gap and let them pass. One fellow, like some dumbfoundered mortal on a racecourse, was caught by the heels, but even he, they said, received no hurt, nor indeed, with the single exception of some one on the left wing, who was said to have been wounded by an arrow, did any Hellene in this battle suffer a single hurt. Cyrus, seeing the Hellenes conquering, as far as they went at any rate were concerned, and in hot pursuit, was well content, but in spite of his joy and the salutations offered him at that moment by those about him, as though he were already king, he was not led away to join in the pursuit, but keeping his squadron of 600 horsemen in close order, waited and watched to see what the king himself would do. The king, he knew, held the center of the Persian army. Indeed, it is the fashion for the Asiatic monarch to occupy that position during action for this twofold reason. He holds the safest place, with his troops on either side of him, while if he has occasion to dispatch any necessary rider along the lines, his troops will receive the message in half the time. Accordingly, the king on this occasion held the center of his army, but for all that he was outside Cyrus's left wing, and seeing that no one offered him battle in front, nor yet that the troops in front of him, he wheeled as if to encircle the enemy. It was then that Cyprus, in apprehension lest the king might get round to the rear and cut to pieces the Hellenic body, charged to meet him. Attacking with his 600, he mastered the line of troops in front of the king, and put to flight the 6,000, cutting, as it is said, with his own hand their general Artaxerxes. But as soon as the rout commenced, Cyrus's own 600 themselves, in the ardor of pursuit, were scattered, with the exception of a handful who were left with Cyrus himself, chiefly his table companions, so called. Left alone with these, he caught sight of the king and the close throng about him. Unable longer to contain himself, with a cry, "I see the man!" he rushed at him and dealt a blow at his chest, wounding him through the corslet. This, according to the statement of Ctesias the surgeon, who further states that he himself healed the wound. As Cyrus delivered the blow, some one struck him with a javelin under the eye severely, and in the struggle which then ensued between the king and Cyrus, and those about to protect one or the other, we have the statement of Ctesias as to the number slain on the king's side, for he was by his side. On the other Cyrus himself fell, and 8 of his bravest companions lay at the top of him. The story says that Artapus, the trustiest among his wand wearers, when he saw that Cyrus had fallen to the ground, leapt from his horse and threw his arms about him. The king bade one slay him as a worthy victim to his brother. Others say that Artapates drew his scimitar and slew himself by his own hand. A golden scimitar, it is true, he had. He also wore a collar and bracelets and the other ornaments such as the noblest Persians wear, for his kindness and fidelity had won him honors at the hands of Cyrus. 9. So died Cyrus, a man the kingliest and most worthy to rule of all the Persians who have lived since the elder Cyrus, according to the concurrent testimony of all who are reputed to have known him intimately. To begin from the beginning, when still a boy, and whilst being brought up with his brother and the other lads, his unrivalled excellence was recognized. For the sons of the noblest Persians, it must be known, are brought up, one and all, as the king's portals. Here lessons of sobriety and self-control may largely be laid to heart, while there is nothing base or ugly for eye or ear to feed upon. There is the daily spectacle ever before the boys of some receiving honor from the king, and again of others receiving dishonor, and the tale of all this is in their ears, so that from the earliest boyhood they learn how to rule and be ruled. In this courtly training Cyrus earned a double reputation, for he was held to be a paragon of modesty among his fellows, rendering an obedience to his elders which exceeded that of many of his own inferiors. And next he bore away the palm for skill in horsemanship and for the love of the animal himself. Nor less in matters of war, in the use of the bow and the javelin, was held by men in general to be at once the aptest of learners and the most eager practiser. As soon as his age permitted, the same preeminence showed itself in his fondness for the chase, not without a certain appetite for perilous adventure in facing the wild beasts themselves. Once a bear made a furious rush at him, and without wincing he grappled with her and was pulled from his horse, receiving wounds, the scars of which were visible through his life. But in the end he slew the creature, nor did he forget him who first came to his aid, but made him enviable in the eyes of many. After he had been sent down by his father to be satrap of Lydia and Great Phrygia and Cappadocia, and had been appointed general of those forces whose business it is to muster in the plain of Castulus, nothing was more noticeable in his conduct than the importance which he attached to the faithful fulfilment of every treaty or compact or undertaking entered into with others. He would tell no lies to any one. Thus doubtless it was he won the confidence alike of individuals and of the communities entrusted to his care. Or in case of hostility, a treaty made with Cyrus was a guarantee sufficient to the combatant that he would suffer nothing contrary to its terms. Therefore, in the war with Tissaphernes, all of the states of their own accord chose Cyrus in lieu of Tissaphernes, except only the men of Miletus, and these were only alienated through fear of him, because he refused to abandon their exiled citizens, and his deeds and words bore emphatic witness to his principle. Even if they were weakened in number or in fortune, he would never abandon those who had once become his friends. He made no secret of his endeavor to outdo his friends and foes alike in reciprocity of conduct. The prayer has been attributed to him, "God grant that I may live long enough to recompense my friends and requite my foes with a strong arm." However this may be, no one, at least in our days, ever drew together so ardent a following of friends, eager to lay at his feet their money, their cities, their own lives and persons. Nor is it to be inferred that from this that he suffered the malefactor and wrongdoer to laugh him to scorn. On the contrary, these he punished most unflinchingly. It was no rare sight to see on the well-trodden highways men who had forfeited hand or foot or eye, the result being that throughout the satrapy of Cyrus, anyone, Hellene or barbarian, provided he were innocent, might fearlessly travel wherever he pleased, and take with him whatever he felt disposed. However, as all allowed, it was for the brave in war that he reserved a special honor. To take the first instance to hand, he had a war with the Pisidians and Mysians. Being himself at the head of an expedition into those territories, he could observe those who voluntarily encountered risks. These he made rulers of the territory which he subjected, and afterwards honored them with other gifts. So that, if the good and brave were set on a pinnacle of fortune, cowards were recognized as their natural slaves. And so it befell that Cyrus never had lack of volunteers in any service or danger, whenever it was expected that his eye would be upon them. So again, wherever he might discover any one ready to distinguish himself in the service of uprightness, his delight was to make this man richer than those who seek for gain by unfair means. On the same principle, his own administration was in all respects uprightly conducted, and in particular he secured the services of an army worthy of the name. Generals and subalterns alike came to him from across the seas, not merely to make money, but because they saw that loyalty to Cyrus was a more profitable investment than so many pounds a month. Let any man whatsoever render him willing service, such enthusiasm was sure to win its reward. And so Cyrus could always command the service of the best assistants, it was said, whatever the work might be. Or if he saw any skillful and just steward who furnished well the country over which he ruled and created revenues, so far from robbing him at any time, to whom he delighted to give more. So that toil was a pleasure, and gains were amassed with confidence, and least of all from Cyrus would a man conceal the amount of his possessions, seeing that he showed no jealousy of wealth openly avowed, but his endeavor was rather to turn to account the riches of those who kept them secret. Towards the friends he had made, whose kindliness he knew, or whose fitness as fellow workers with himself, in aught which he might wish to carry out, he had tested, he showed himself in turn an adept in the arts of courtesy. Just in proportion as he felt the need of this friend or that to help him, so he tried to help each of them in return in whatever seemed to be their heart's desire. Many were the gifts bestowed on him, for many and diverse reasons. No one man perhaps ever received more, no one certainly was ever more ready to bestow them upon others, with an eye ever to the taste of each, so as to gratify what he saw to be the individual requirement. Many of these presents were sent to him as personal adornments of the body or for battle, and as touching these he would say, "How am I to deck myself out in all these? To my mind a man's chief ornament is the adornment of nobly adorned friends." Indeed, that he should triumph over his friends in the great matters of well-doing is not surprising, seeing that he was much more powerful than they, but he should not go beyond them in minute attentions, and in an eager desire to give pleasure, seems to me, I must confess, more admirable. Frequently, when he had tasted some specially excellent wine, he would send the half remaining flagon to some friend with a message to say, "Cyrus says, this is the best wine he has tasted for a long time. This is his excuse for sending it to you. He hopes that you will drink it up today with a choice party of friends." Or, perhaps, he would send the remainder of a dish of geese, half loaves of bread, and so forth, the bearer being instructed to say, "This is Cyrus's favorite dish. He hopes you will taste it yourself." Or perhaps there was a great dearth of provender, when, through the number of his servants and his own careful forethought, he was enabled to get supplies for himself. At such times he would send to his friends in different parts, bidding them feed their horses on his hay, since it would not do for horses that carried his friends to go starving. Then, on any long march or expedition, where the crowd of lookers-on would be large, he would call to his friends to him, and entertain them with serious talk, so much as to say, "These I delight to honor." So that, for myself and all that I can hear, I should be disposed to say that no one, Greek or barbarian, was ever so beloved. In proof of this I may cite the fact that, though Cyrus was the king's vassal and slave, no one ever forsook him to join his master, if I may except the attempt of Orontes, which was abortive. That man, indeed, had to learn that Cyrus was closer to the heart of him on whose fidelity he relied than he himself was. On the other hand, many a man revolted from the king to Cyrus, after they went to war with one another. Nor were these nobodies, but rather persons high in the king's affection. Yet, for all that, they believed that their virtues would obtain a reward more adequate from Cyrus than from the king. Another great proof at once of his own worth and of his capacity rightly to discern all loyal, loving, and firm friendship is afforded by an incident which belongs to the last moment of his life. He was slain, but fighting for his life beside him fell every one of his faithful bodyguard of friends and table companions, with the sole exception of Arius, who was in command of the cavalry on the left, and he no sooner perceived the fall of Cyrus than he betook himself to flight, with the whole body of his troops under his lead. End of Book 1, Part 4. Book 1, Part 5 of Xenofonte's Anábase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anábase by Xenofonte, translated by H. G. Dakins. Book 1, Part 5. Number 10. Then the head of Cyrus and his right hand were severed from his body. But the king and those about him pursued and fell upon the Syrian camp, and the troops of Arius no longer stood their ground, but fled through their own camp back to the halting place of the night before, a distance of 4 parasangs, it is said. So the king and those with him fell to ravaging right and left, and amongst other spoil he captured the Phocian woman, who was the concubine of Cyrus, witty and beautiful, if fame speaks correctly. The Milesian, who was the younger, was also seized by some of the king's men, but letting go her outer garment, she made good her escape to the Hellenes, who had been left among the camp followers on guard. These fell at once into line, and put to sword many of the pillagers, though they lost some of the men themselves. They stuck to the place, and succeeded in saving not only that lady, but all else, whether chattels or human beings, which lay within their reach. At this point the king and the Hellenes were something like 3 miles apart. The one set were pursuing their opponents, just as if their conquest had been general. The others were pillaging as merrily as if their victory were already universal. But when the Hellenes learnt that the king and his troops were in the baggage camp, and the king on his side was informed by Tissaphernes that the Hellenes were victorious in their quarter of the field, and had gone forward in pursuit, the effect was instantaneous. The king massed his troops and formed into line. Clearchus summoned Prozinus, who was next to him, and debated whether to send a detachment or to go in a body to the camp to save it. Meanwhile the king was seen again advancing, as it seemed, from the rear, and the Hellenes, turning right about, prepared to receive his attack then and there. But instead of advancing upon them at that point, he drew off, following the line by which he had passed earlier in the day, outside the left wing of his opponent, and so picked up in his passage those who had deserted to the Hellenes during the battle, as also Tissaphernes and his division. The latter had not fled in the first shock of the encounter. He had charged parallel to the line of the Euphrates into the Greek peltasts, and through them, but charge as he might, he did not lay low a single man. On the contrary, the Hellenes made a gap to let him through, hacking them with their swords and hurling their javelins as they passed. Episthanes of Amphipolis was in command of the peltasts, and he showed himself a sensible man, it was said. Thus it was that Tissaphernes, having got through haphazard, with rather the worst of it, failed to wheel round and return the way he came, but, reaching the camp of the Hellenes, there fell in with the king, and falling into order again, the 2 divisions advanced side by side. But when they were parallel with the original left wing of the Hellenes, fear seized the latter, lest they might take them in flank and enfold them on both sides and cut them down. In this apprehension they determined to extend their line and place the river on their rear. But while they deliberated, the king passed by and ranged his troops in line to meet them, in exactly the same position in which he advanced to offer battle at the commencement of the engagement. The Hellenes, now seeing them in close proximity and in battle order, once again raised the paean, and began the attack with still greater enthusiasm than before. And once again the barbarians did not wait to receive them, but took to flight, even at a greater distance than before. The Hellenes pressed the pursuit until they reached a certain village, where they halted, for above the village rose a mound, on which the king and his party rallied and reformed. They had no infantry any longer, but the crest was crowded with cavalry, so that it was impossible to discover what was happening. They did see, they said, the royal standard, a kind of golden eagle with wings extended, perched on a bar of wood and raised upon a lance. But as soon as the Hellenes again moved onwards, the hostile cavalry at once left the hillock, not in a body any longer, but in fragments, some streaming from one side, some from another, and the crest was gradually stripped of its occupants, till at last the company was gone. Accordingly Clearchus did not ascend the crest, but posting his army at its base, he sent Lycius of Syracuse and another to the summit, with orders to inspect the condition of things on the other side, and to report results. Lycius galloped up and investigated, bringing back news that they were fleeing might and main. Almost at that instant the sun sank beneath the horizon. There the Hellenes halted. They grounded arms and rested, marveling the while that Cyrus was not anywhere to be seen, and that no messenger had come from him. For they were in complete ignorance of his death, and conjectured that either he had gone off in pursuit, or had pushed forward to occupy some point. Left to themselves, they now deliberated whether they should stay where they were and have the baggage train brought up, or should return to camp. They resolved to return, and about supper time reached the tents. Such was the conclusion of the day. They found the larger portion of their property pillaged, eatables and drinkables alike, not excepting the wagons laden with corn and wine, which Cyrus had prepared in case of some extreme need overtaking the expedition, to divide among the Hellenes. There were 400 of these wagons, it was said, and these now had been ransacked by the king and his men, so that the greater number of the Hellenes went supperless, having already gone without their breakfasts, since the king had appeared before the usual halt for breakfast. Accordingly, in no better plight than this, they passed the night. End of Book 1.